All right. Scott Compton, welcome to my warehouse in the making.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a little cold in here, so if you see us go like that, it's
Shiver.
okay. Yes. Right. Now, I'm super excited for this interview. Why don't you just start off the bat? What do you do?
Okay. I'm Scott Compton.
Mm-hmm.
I've been, currently I run a business called Lifestyle Hygiene.
Okay.
And lifestylehygiene.com.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I go into homes and businesses and offices and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
into environments internally, and look at external environments for their electromagnetic fields and frequencies.
Okay.
What that entails is I have an arsenal of gadgets and meters
Mm-hmm.
that I take in and look around and get an assessment of, okay, there's magnetic fields, electric fields, RF, microwave emissions from all of our technologies, and also look at other electrical components. I'll look at stray voltage, stray current. I'll look at what's also another term of EMF called dirty electricity.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll go in and make an assessment and help my clients out by trying to find spots that are what I say closer to nature
Mm-hmm.
and nature's natural frequency rather than all the soup of EMF that's
Mm-hmm.
around us all the time.
So for those who may be watching this, they're like, EMF, dirty electricity, like what are you talking about? Can you break down why someone would search for your service?
Right. So it's interesting. So, in this modern age of all of the way we live, people, I think, are becoming more aware and more taxed with their health.
Okay.
And in some cases, they start putting a little bit of a picture together, like a correlation to say, why is it when I sit down at the computer for a half hour, I start feeling tingles in my hands?
Mm.
Or why is it I'm spending all day long in front of a monitor at my desk and I just feel lethargic, run down? Other people, over time they'll start attributing it to, is there something to this? Like something about my environment? Is it mold? Is it some other kind of environmental element happening? So a lot of my clients start putting that 2 + 2 picture together with EMF.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's interesting because they actually might think it's EMF, and I have to come back to them and say, well, you have a low EMF environment right now that you're living in, so there may be another culprit altogether,
Mm-hmm.
but at least getting an assessment done, you'll kind of start to eliminate or start to put the pieces together if there is something going on in the environment.
Mm.
So for instance, I have here, this is called an ENV RD10. This is a basic meter that I use as multiple meters. What I like to do, I go in and I check with several meters to measure certain bands of EMF.
Mm-hmm.
So if you measure the microwave RF band, it typically is between 200 megahertz up to about 8 gigahertz.
Okay.
And that's kind of the EM spectrum range. However, different meters do different things. Like this one measures magnetic, electric, and RF at different frequencies. The electric and magnetic fields are the lower frequencies, the ultra low frequencies that are come off of our power grid.
Okay.
From the 60 hertz or 50 hertz power grid.
Okay.
So this meter will measure that and the intensities off of that, but this will also measure some of these higher frequencies, like the more newer frequencies we get with our Bluetooth and with our Wi-Fi systems, this sort of stuff. So, and our smart meters, that's a big one too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'll do is I'll go in and use multiple meters and take kind of a median of going, okay, with this meter I see these kind of levels happening. With my other meters I'll see this happening, and I'll put all the pieces together for what I think's going on in the environment, and then write a report
Mm-hmm.
for my clients and give them a breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's about an 8 to 10 page breakdown
Mm-hmm.
of everything I've seen and experienced in their environments. And I will focus always on the bedroom space first, because a lot of people, they might not realize in their bedroom could be a higher EMF environment,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like the frequencies are not, everyone wants to sleep like you're sleeping in a camper in nature or
Totally.
like, campground. So I want to try to get that back first, because 6 to 10 hours of their every day is going to be in that sleeping space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. So I have a lot of I've had so many clients over the years that I start to put the pieces together a little bit too.
Yeah.
And then start to help them out as to what little things can be done. A lot of things that you can do, you can mitigate these. It's totally free.
Yeah.
Like just by adjusting the space where your bed is in the room, how close to the wires in the walls, moving the router in the house to different locations, putting something between the bed space and the router, so you just don't have as much EMF in these spaces where you're spending the majority of your day.
Okay, so let's break it down for people who are like, I still don't understand what he's saying.
Sure.
So you go into someone's home or workspace and you measure what? EMF. What else?
I measure, EMF is kind of this umbrella term.
Okay.
And the EMF, it's electromagnetic frequency. So how I like to describe this on simple terms would be like how much energy and light, because EMF is energy and light in combination.
Okay.
So how much energy and light is coming into your space from artificially, from our technologies, from a nearby cell phone tower that's penetrating through the walls into your home, from your smart meter.
I like this. Sorry, Yep. Must have a.
I have a little hair.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's fine.
So EMF, light and
energy in combination. And as you can imagine, the more energy you have, these meters will help to detect higher intensities of it.
Okay.
Right? And light energy in combination is like the electromagnetic fields, what's being generated from this light energy. So like artificial light from just overhead lighting is EMF. We don't think of it in those terms, but artificial lighting is just, again, it's even higher frequency than some of these frequencies that are measured on these meters.
So someone could be like, all right, well, what's the big deal?
Right.
So what is the big deal between figuring out the levels of EMF that are in your home sleep space,
Yes.
Living room space? I mean, a lot of us are working from home now. So, and then workspace. So why would someone be interested in having you come in and measure those?
Yeah, so I think for most of my clients, it's health. It's oftentimes poor sleep. It's oftentimes other conditions they're experiencing, but also really understanding how the day-night cycle works. The circadian rhythm is a big part of this, because the frequencies I measure are invisible. And obviously, when we go to bed at night, we shut the light off at night.
Yeah.
But are you shutting off the other EMFs that are invisibly hitting us?
So explain circadian rhythm.
Okay, so circadian rhythm is your daily cycles. There was a Nobel Prize recently awarded in 2016 that shows how important circadian rhythm is to your health. This goes into different types of genes and pathways with, for instance, how well you're able to produce melatonin, and if your body can suppress melatonin, which it does, and how it gets suppressed. But also like the importance of it as like kind of the gateway to your health. Like if your circadian rhythm gets off for extended periods of time, we're going to experience other oxidative stress, other problems. Melatonin in and of itself is an amazing thing that's used in pretty much every cell in your body, and it helps to clean out your body. Like as an antioxidant, like I've said this in some studies, it's measured as 20 times greater than the power of vitamin C.
Yeah.
So It's a big deal.
So take me through a basic circadian rhythm.
Okay, so starting at the morning, at sunrise, we awaken in the morning. Our body starts to experience an awakening, a surge. Different pathways turn on. I mean, your cortisol starts going up, your glutamate levels start going up. We start to awaken. Our obviously our respiratory rate increases, and we become enlivened for the day. But the morning sun really figures into this, like understanding the sun and the frequencies that come off of the sun, how they get filtered through the atmosphere at certain times of day, really plays into the circadian rhythm and what life expects to have. Like if you think of a squirrel or a bunny out in nature, you know, they're in the sunlight. You know, the sun's coming through their pupils, through their eyes, which I like to always think your eyes is your brain. It's an extension of your brain. The first input into your brain as well as your ears, right? So
I just was listening to a podcast this morning, and the neuroscientist described eyes as being like brains outside of your brain.
yes, yeah,
I thought that was
and
really interesting.
it's what it is, and like obviously what we think about is, oh, our brain is this thing that's in our head that's up here, but the light input into what's called the RPE, the retinal pigmosa, epithelium pigmosa, it's something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a big, long scientific.
I believe you.
Yeah, but this how it's kind of like the mirror part of the inside of your eye.
Yeah.
And the light frequencies hit this, and they bounce around, and they do a dance, and they let your body know, okay, this is morning, or this is evening, this is midday, because the sun itself changes over the course of the day, to the point where, like, right in the morning, I mean, there's red light and a lot of blue light in there, and UVA. The UVB component isn't there yet. As a matter of fact, even in the morning, the UVA is really not showing up much either.
Okay.
And as the day goes on, you know, depending on your altitude and all these other conditions, how you know the environment you're living in, usually by 10 a.m. most parts of the world, UVB is going to start showing up.
Okay.
Unless you live it like on the top of, I don't know, Monte Picchu, and you're like
Which would be great.
7,000 feet
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
You might be getting UVB like starting to show up at like 8:30 or 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
But as you know, I'm getting into UVB a little bit because most people are aware that UVB has a huge interaction on your skin to produce vitamin D in your body. And just like when different light frequencies hit our eyes, and there's different pathway things that happen when UVA goes through our eyes, and this is also a pathway to help create melatonin, or the precursors for melatonin when you get sunlight. So later in the day, you have good melatonin yields to help you clean out and help your biology while you're sleeping.
So the morning light essentially is telling your body to wake up, is activating the production of vitamin D, which then helps your immunity, right?
Well, upon your skin surfaces,
Yeah.
there's opsins on your skin for like interacting with different light particles of different frequencies. But yes, like the skin interaction, like for UVB light, helps to create that cholesterol cascade back to vitamin D, and vitamin D, as we know, it has like all these deeper pathways to your steroids, to your testosterone, like all the way down these chains. It's very important as to why vitamin D is a big issue. And as we know now, like a lot of people in the last 10 years across society have had very low vitamin D yields. They go to their doctors and they're like, your blood vitamin D levels are quite low. You know, I attribute it to a lot of people just living more of a modern life, a tech life, where they're in their little boxes, not getting outside, not getting enough time, you know, in nature, and revealing enough of their skin to the world to get a good, you know, solid vitamin D, you know, especially in the summer to build it up. And then, you know, as winter comes along, you know, you have that cycle, you have the seasonal cycle, in addition to the daily cycle, as to how well you're going to be maintaining this homeostasis for some of these really vital compounds like melatonin and vitamin D in your body.
Okay, so back to the basic circadian rhythm. You wake up, you have these morning rays come through, which then activate all kinds of things. The skin starts and then it goes more deeper.
Yes.
You get UVA first
Yeah,
in the day.
UV, well, actually blue light, some of the blue, and in the IR, the red light is
Uh-huh.
there at sunrise as well.
Uh-huh.
And we have to think of the sun as like this great amount of frequencies, like the frequencies that are coming in, and as they come in from the sun, they're coming in through our atmosphere. And
Okay.
our atmosphere is doing different things to this light, either allowing certain frequencies to show up or to be blocked, as well as cloud covers, you know. You know, on a cloudy day, the UVB level goes way down, but the UVA, just the nature of UVA, it will penetrate through those clouds much easier than UVB.
So is the UVA the one responsible in activating the vitamin D production, or is that UVB?
That's UVB.
Okay.
And UVA is actually very useful for helping to create precursors for like melatonin, your melatonin production later in the day. As a matter of fact, UVA has other uses as well. Like it appears in the science that UVA is helping to give like the precursor for your skin to make the absorption of UVB later in the day a better thing. So imagine you're out in the morning, getting a lot of sun in the morning. It's not burning you. Then as UVB comes in, you might be less likely to burn. Right now, you know, a lot of people call this like internal sun, like ways of creating your own internal sunscreen. There are also a lot of carotenoids and other food compounds that can be eaten to do a similar effect, to help boost the effect of not having the damage, you know, the UVB is damaging to the body. And as a lot of people know now in health communities, the more rancid foods you eat will help to burn you and get you burned in UVB light easier as well. So someone like me that's more fair skinned, you know, I think about, well, what kind of advantages do I have getting out into the sun and to get that vitamin D production? So part of that routine for me would be to go out into the morning sun, get morning sun on my skin, my body, through my eyes, just for my circadian rhythm. And then by midday, by like, you know, the noon hours when UVB is the strongest, then be mindful of, okay, getting the right dose size. You know, usually after 15, 20 minutes, I'm not going to be burned, but if I'm out there for an hour or two, you know, I could, depending. Yeah, and the time of year and the altitude and all that.
Okay, so UVA is a precursor, is a prepper. Like, all right, you guys, this is what's going to happen today. You're going to produce vitamin D. I'm going to set up the precursors for melatonin. Melatonin, you're going to kick in the evening.
Right.
Like, you're going to produce all this antioxidants that's going to flush out the body while this person sleeps. Okay, so continue on the basic circadian rhythm. So from the morning and now midday UVB.
Yep.
Okay.
And then like thinking about the lumens, like the amount of intensity of light that's produced, you know, as you come up from your breakfast time to your lunch, you know, the lumens are going to become the strongest around lunchtime, midday when the sun's directly overhead. When the sun's directly overhead, there's the least amount of atmospheric filtering of the light. By the way, the light that's coming off of the sun, I should just say this now because it's quite different than EMF. And this is a lot of this is lost. A lot of people out there believe there's no problem with EMF because they view artificial light almost the same as sunlight. And like we are adapted for eons under the sun, where all this new artificial light is different in multiple ways with multiple properties. So like if I think of a midday UV, you know, midday sunlight that comes down on me, a lot of people might be like, oh, I've been told by science this is really scary. But then looking into the research, when you look at like, okay, UVB looks damaging in the science, you go to look at what they're using to measure it. Are they using the sun in these experiments?
Or artificial
Or are
light.
they using artificial UVB light that's hooked up to our power grid that has other effects and missing wavelengths? Our sunlight is very full spectrum lighting. But if they're measuring some of their experiments with, you know, just, okay, it's this UVB band we're looking at, we're pulsing it because you could pulse it artificially. It's not like this nice smooth sine wave coming through our atmosphere. It's this different kind of light that our body might view as being more biologically active in different ways to stress the body and stress the cells in different ways. So you have this very different, weird form of light that we're producing, that we're intaking into our bodies and then having to try to digest. And how it hits our different organs and how it hits our eyes and different parts of our body could have a different effect as well. So it becomes very complicated very fast as to how a frequency could be beneficial or detrimental to your health.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So then after midday, what is your body then preparing to do?
Well, yeah, so once the lumens like peak and then it starts to fall, then your body is getting to the point of feeling like, okay, it's time to like start prepping for the remainder of the day. And you know, there's going to be a window of time, and depending on where you live in the seasons, and if you travel a lot, like if you just like if you're in a natural rhythm compared to like living a lifestyle where you're out of the rhythm, I think this is where the body will be. I mean, it's all subjective, right? And it's like anecdotal, but I feel that the light, once the light comes back down on the other side and the lumens start falling off, it's kind of the reverse process where your body, your circadian rhythm, all the pathways, everything through this time of day is prepping yourself for when the sun goes down and then, you know, sleep time. So it's just the reverse process to me compared to the morning time. But then at the same time, it's hard to probably get conditions to test humans these days a proper circadian rhythm anymore. Circadian rhythm also is a larger it's a larger thing to me in thinking about how we just live on the planet Earth, because we have to keep in mind we have other forces at work on the planet. The planet itself emits a pulse, which is around 8 hertz, which is called the Schumann Resonance. And the Schumann Resonance, even of the last 20, 30 years, has been kind of not at 8 hertz. It's been bouncing around at times a little bit, which is interesting and concerning for some certain people that are monitoring it.
It's like the Earth has heart arrhythmia or something.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, however you want to think about it.
Yeah.
And then we also have to think about the sun itself, because the sun, you know, it's not, even though it's a constant, we have CMEs, you know, coronal mass ejections that happen that can interfere to create northern lights on the planet. We can have different EMF conditions that show up in different places of the Earth. I mean, the Earth itself is also always moving, and the solar wind is always hitting the planet. And because it's always hitting the planet, we always have this pull of EMF, like a polarity from the North Pole to the South Pole. So you have the force from the solar wind coming in through the top of the planet, coming down through and creating this dipole.
So everybody's circadian rhythm is evolving at this point.
And it's adapting to conditions. Some of the earlier experiments on circadian rhythm, they used to lock people down in a dungeon or like in a room for many days, and they've actually done experiments where they've disconnected people from the Schumann resonance, and they've seen different results. So, you know, when we just know, I think we all know intuitively if we lock ourselves in a dungeon for a week, we feel really bad at the end of it. And I even joked, there used to be a show on one of the cable networks called Solitary 2.0, Solitary. Okay. And what they would do is they'd mess with your circadian rhythm on the show. And they got people, after a few days, to become so crazed out that they thought that they did little tricks on them. They said, okay, you've had your 8 hours of sleep. And they had no awareness of time, and they didn't realize they got an hour and a half of sleep. And they're like, that night went by so fast. They had no awareness of it. And it's true. Once you eliminate these light signals, these frequencies from our biology, to such an extent away from nature, and it becomes so artificial, our bodies really get into a state where they have a very hard time adapting and cleaning and healing. And that's the end of the day.
we started this flow of circadian rhythm because you said EMFs can affect circadian rhythm. So I want to really pinpoint exactly the benefits of circadian rhythm, because then I want to talk about how EMF affects that.
Okay.
So going through the day, and I know it's so complex, but I do want to keep it simple enough so that people can follow how does EMF and eliminating it in my work and living space benefit me.
Right.
And so circadian rhythm, where we left off was your body is now prepping to produce melatonin and go to sleep, correct? So around, what else is it doing around the time that it's producing melatonin?
Well, a lot of the systems are like, you know, you have your organ systems, the cardiovascular system, and you know, your brain function. So thinking first of your brain, we start to go from this earlier in the day to what's called like more of a sympathetic, like we're more reactive. We can become more nervous, right? And your nervous system is cranked up where you're dealing with all your tasks of the day, you're super busy, you're in the flow, and all these things are going on. And by the evening time, we want the opposite effect to happen. We want to become more, it's called parasympathetic. And when you become more parasympathetic, this is when your nervous system becomes more calm. You can get into more of a relaxed state. As a matter of fact, like even sexual behaviors are more parasympathetic.
Yeah.
We have like just that ability to chillax at the end of the day that people don't have because, well, why isn't? Why can't they chillax? Even though if they're at home, just like, okay, I want to become the couch potato, why is it they can't actually find a way that they're actually chilling out to get a deeper sleep? There's 4 stages of sleep. We're trying to get this down into this 4th deepest layer to really provide these health benefits. And what I have found over my years of doing EMF stuff is that oftentimes the behaviors around the artificial lighting, which is a form of EMF, it is EMF, just it's, you know, it's the visible light spectrum that we can see. These, a lot of this blue, actually it's indigo light, you know, in the last 3 or 4 years it's shown that the blue, what's called blue light out there in society, it's really from about, I won't get too detailed, but it's like from about 415 to 465 nanometer light, which includes blue light, indigo light, and up into the green light, kind of this area of the artificial light spectrum, or the regular spectrum. When it's artificial light, it's pulsed, it is still keeping us into this more sympathetic state and not getting us parasympathetic.
Okay, so let's focus on the benefits of parasympathetic going into the evening. So you're starting to chill, you're starting to relax. What's happening in that time?
Yeah, in this time with your health, or with the light of things, or
let's do with, let's say, in benefit of circadian rhythm. Like, what is the best case scenario going into the evening, and what is your body doing to then prepare for sleep?
Yeah, so in the evening, when your circadian rhythm is starting to really calm back down, and you're able to produce the melatonin that you need, your cells are able to also cycle correctly. Your cell cycles are extremely important, like to not halt them or suppress them unnaturally. As you know, like if there's a problem with your genes, or with what's happening currently in a cell, let's say there's some fragmentation, let's say more mitochondrial mutants within that part of your DNA, or whether your regular DNA has some issues, like your body will try to destroy that cell, which is a fancy term called apoptosis, programmed cell death. And the cell cycles have different stages, so it's really...
Apoptosis!
Yes.
Sorry.
it's pop those cells, right? So we want to naturally create these rhythms so the cells will go through their cycling as they want to do it for the health of the whole organism. And when...
But your body needs to be in that parasympathetic.
In a lot of cases it does.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, there's benefits for both stages,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can take both stages too far, and this is where the circadian rhythm really helps to define how the cells, like how they're going to flow through the day and find this own sine, like this, it's like a sine wave, find this own flow,
Yeah.
rather than having these sharp-edged things where I'm up till midnight being beamed with artificial lighting, maybe I have the TV on, maybe I'm in front of the computer,
Mm-hmm.
and this is all the visible light we see, and we know just like we don't feel as good under it in the evening, but what about all the other side of all these other invisible EMFs are being hit with?
Well, so explain, so you're going from a stimulated stasis throughout the day to a more calm, and the calm is to then start producing melatonin.
Right.
So what is the benefit? Why is it so important for us to produce melatonin to then go to sleep?
Yeah, so, well, it's...
Or not to go to sleep.
Yeah, it's not to
but
go to sleep,
yes.
right, like it...
To use while we sleep.
Yes, to use while we sleep. I mean, what you're asking goes deeper into the biology,
Yeah. But
where...
that's what I want to touch, because I want everybody to understand how important it is to have balance in the body, and then I want you to explain how EMF interferes with that process.
Okay. For melatonin can easily come into cells,
Mm-hmm.
and it is needed to come into your cells to like clean them out.
Mm-hmm.
Different processes involved, like what's called autophagy.
Mm-hmm.
Even in your mitochondrial complexes in complex 4, there's like interlinkings with melatonin there.
1 second. Mitochondria are so important
Mm-hmm.
in our cells. What are mitochondria and what is their job?
Well, most people know that, you know, they've been taught that, you know, that the energy produces of your cell, but it's way deeper than
Mm-hmm.
that. Your mitochondria are like the things that produce your energy, that keep you going, that, you know, you have different requirements in your different organ systems to have different energy levels. For instance, in your brain, as you're going to sleep at night, you know, when you become more parasympathetic, the energy starts falling back down. As a matter of fact, the frequencies go from like 30 hertz down to like 7 to like 4 hertz,
Mm-hmm.
and you start calming down, and the energy needed and required for your brain is created by these mitochondria, and in each cell you might have 4,000 to 5,000 of these
Mm-hmm.
to create the energy required to do all your brain function,
Mm-hmm.
to create your own internal EMF,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And your own frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And with your demands of your body, you know, obviously if you're running a marathon, you're going to have more muscle demand, so your mitochondria will be cranking there. But when you're just a person sitting around like us talking right now, like 30-40% of our energy demands are through our brain at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of another obviously huge area is our heart system,
Mm-hmm.
and the density of mitochondria there. Back in the 1980s when mitochondria was really studied,
Mm-hmm.
that's when they used different tissues from fish and different animals to see how dense it is in the heart, to study and figure out like some of the systems in the
Mm-hmm.
mitochondria,
Mm-hmm.
where you can take in carbohydrates,
Mm-hmm.
you can take in fats,
Mm-hmm.
and these break down in different ways. Carbohydrates go through complex 1
Mm-hmm.
to start the electron transport chain,
Yep.
to get this rotor at the end of complex 5 in the mitochondria,
Mm-hmm.
to create this gradient and create this extra energy as ATP, as we know.
Yep.
And then in complex 2, we take fats
Mm-hmm.
and we break fats down
Mhm.
this way in a whole different
Mm-hmm.
process called oxidative phosphorylation.
Mm-hmm.
And that will, again, kind of go through the system where it creates more water and CO2, because fat breaks down as water and CO2. An interesting little factoid is we breathe out a lot of our fat when we break it down.
Mhm.
And 83% is CO2 out of our lungs generally, and the rest 17% is like generated as water in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes into a great energy production there for fats.
Which is why there's the big studies, like the book that just came out, Breath, and how when we regulate our breathing and when we become become very conscious breathers.
Yeah.
And, you know, taping our mouth at night if we have sleep apnea, making our nose learn how to breathe properly, like you actually lose fat because you're breathing normally.
Sinuses.
And then in my line of work of health and fitness, you know, you learn that in the cell, the mitochondria are your energy producers and cell repairers, but when we gain weight, that cell becomes kind of clogged with fat and it kills off the mitochondria, and then the cell reproduces at that state, you know.
Right.
So in reality, when it comes to weight loss, it's not just the number on the scale, it's literally like the detox of your cells and the reproduction of mitochondria.
Yes.
So mitochondria are super important in our body.
Yeah, they're unique in a lot of aspects, like the fact that mitochondria contain their own genome. So you have mitochondrial DNA in addition to our nuclear DNA. And those mitochondrial DNA, as you can imagine, they code for different energy systems within the mitochondrial systems. So if your mitochondrial DNA get damaged, you create mitochondrial mutants in the cell. And then there's like this ratio of how much good mitochondria do I have in a cell versus the mutant that are in the cell. And
Imposters.
yeah, and there's a researcher called Dr. Doug Wallace, and he's seen this like energy management. He has this whole theory about it, and it's interesting. He goes into talking about how you reach a certain threshold of, I get enough mutants in this cell, and if I have this previous gene expression, I will start expressing this new disease, this new illness, to kind of kick the can down the road. Instead of all the cells just dying off, you have this like ratio of good mitochondria to bad mitochondria. The overall engine is not firing right in your cell, and it's not burning the energy it should and creating the energy it should. And then you suddenly, instead of the car just dying, like the engine just dying, it's still putting along, but expressing this disease as it's putting along. And hopefully, at some point, like you're saying, there's ways you can get the mitochondrial structure and all the mitochondria within them to become less mutant and more real and good and functioning as it should again.
So, but we digress.
Yes, we did.
So, melatonin and mitochondria. So, our body is producing melatonin, and it is detoxing melatonin is an antioxidant that is help repairing our body as we sleep.
Yeah. So there's a in redox biology there's this process called the oxidative stress that is created because of free radicals that are generated. Peroxynitrite is a common one. Even HCO2, like there's different types of free radicals that can form in the cell, and our bodies have to have a way to create this balance, this homeostasis of we do need some free radicals, and actually some free radicals can have benefits in some strange cases, but at the same time, just the way we're living, we're usually at the balance is upset where we have too much free radicals going on in the cell, and that will create direct damage. It can create direct DNA damage.
So melatonin helps flush those free radicals out.
It's not flushing, it's more like integrating. It's combining, so it's like taking the free radical component, like if we view this more mechanistically, it's taking this this extra chain coming off of this free radical and bonding to it to create a more neutral state of a new product that's created from the free radical. And that will it's because this free radical is going around, it's like bonds and then creates more of a neutral compound of a neutral state, so you don't have that oxidative problem as much going on in the cell, which can go in and damage other components like protein structures, organelle structures, DNA directly, all this.
So melatonin is super important.
Yeah, because it can go in and bind to different types of these free radicals and neutralize them.
So they essentially neutralize the threat that are created in our body as we sleep and...
Well, especially for off balance, I mean, you might, let's say you go on a nice vacation to a remote island and you're grounding yourself every day, which is helping to maintain your electron-proton balance in your body.
Mm-hmm.
But you're getting sunlight, at the right doses. You're not overdoing it, but you're getting enough. You're finding the balance of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
You're finding the balance of nature.
Mm-hmm.
You're moving your body,
Mm-hmm.
because moving your body has a lot of benefits too. The breakdown products from your body actually can fuel different things in different ways. Just like if you're living more to the cycles of nature, which we have been designed for, I believe, then you're not going to be producing necessarily the great load of free radicals that might be there in our modern life.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So circadian rhythm is so important because it keeps our body in balance with all the functions that it's doing, with all the repairing, with the neutralizing, the productions of energy. Now, how does EMF affect that circadian rhythm?
Right. So that's what's constantly being looked at in the science, and there have been studies way back in the day. I'm talking from the 1960s, where a lot of the major researchers in EMF came about. I'll mention one that's super popular. Well, Andrew Marino worked in Robert O. Becker's lab.
Okay.
And I interviewed him a few years ago in a podcast I did. But these are like some of the premier researchers that figured out how like the EMF system works within the human body.
Okay.
And this goes deep into regeneration, into how your body can regenerate, which again has to do with sleep. It has to do with stem cells. It has to do with your own EMF pulse. We have like this different like pulsed system of EMF within our body. It's like a DC pulse system, which I'll probably lose a lot of people on knowing what this means. But what it basically means is that we have our own internal energy happening, which produces light energy within our body. In more modern circles in the last like 10 or 20 years, there's this field that's this really sub-biology field that's come out called like biophotonics.
Okay.
And the production of biophotons is kind of the same thing as saying your own electromagnetic energy in your body. So we can have special cameras like photo multipliers that can look into the human body and certain tissues and see during the course of a day, like your circadian rhythm, the course of a day, you can actually take a look at an organ and see the amount of light it's being generated in that organ. And you can start to make some assumptions scientifically about, well, maybe the liver function shouldn't be super high and ramped up at 10 o'clock at night because the guy just had a meal at 9 o'clock, right, to digest all this food. And then you'll see more light heat production. But maybe if you have a certain disease, maybe you'll see the opposite. Maybe that organ's not lighting up at all because maybe there's cancer going on or something else. So this could be like some of the biophotonic stuff that's out there could be a way in the future, another way that we could diagnose maybe what's happening, kind of like what modern mammograms do with the IR cameras, like looking at the breast tissue in certain ways and going, okay, I can use red light frequencies or infrared light frequencies to look to see what's going on instead of using a mammogram, which is more invasive. So there's all kinds of, I think, possibilities using light in different ways for tools, but if we're constantly bombarding our tissues without realizing we're bombarding our tissues with these frequencies, we kind of don't know the answer yet as to, like, do you take the precautionary principle in science and say, I'm just going to assume this could have a biological effect or not? Now, most people would argue that I've come in contact with that don't believe EMF is an issue at all. They'll come to say that, well, the intensities of what's coming off a phone tower is only 3% of what they actually need to use, or even like some really low percentage, and they're just looking at the intensity of light. Now, our bodies run off of intensities that are like 10 to the minus 17th EMF at like so low levels, so super ultra weak levels that a cell phone tower in comparison to our body is still massive amounts of EMF coming into our body. So there will be at some point scientists investigating and probably looking into not just the condition of the intensity of the light, but they'll start looking at all the properties of the light and even the properties of the missing light frequencies that are hitting us. So if you're going to bed at night in a house next to a cell phone tower, and this light can penetrate through your wall materials into your bed space, or let's say you put your router in your bedroom, and you've got all this Wi-Fi coming into your bed space, your body is being hit with EMF at a pretty low intensity. But your own bodily creation of that EMF is like I said, like 10 to the minus 17th, even weaker.
Yeah.
And so one has to ask, well, what kind of biological effects can happen not only based on this intensity, which is still a big unknown, but also with how the light itself looks, like how not like a sine wave it is. It's more jagged. It hits our body and it appears like, even right now in the science, to be more biologically active, like our cells respond to this artificial light in detrimental ways, where it will interact like with the surfaces of your cell membranes and potentially make more oxidative stress potential being created.
Fight off the light.
It's because it's not like our bodies aren't being hit with this like this more smooth light. It's a different property of the light, and maybe we should be doing studies that show, okay, let's actually create an RF microwave signal that's more of a smooth signal, and compare that to another more jagged, where it's more data packets and all this jagged stuff that hits our cells, to really see if there's a big difference in how a cell responds to not just that condition, but other conditions, like if I even play a different harmonic of light. Like if I play a 600 megahertz versus a 650 versus a 700, like maybe really incrementally going up the scale, because, you know, just like on a piano, you can play sour notes and you can play nice sharp notes, and how our cells respond to the different frequencies is, again, yet another, you know, potential that needs to be studied into the future. So at this point, to the layman, it's better to just think about, let's just assume that there could be a problem with the light that we're being hit with. And let's just try to put you back into an environment that doesn't have it in there as much, just to minimize it. And that's what I do, and that's what I try to set up for people, and I do set this up because I can go back, remeasure, and see what their levels are at. Unfortunately, in some cases, depending on where your house is or where your office or your work is, there might not be any other choice but to move if you think this is an issue for you, or if you're feeling it, because there's back like 20, 30 years ago, it was approximated about 2 to 3% of the population could feel it. But then as all of our technology and all of the stuff in our society has grown, this number is now suspected to be more like 6 to 10% of the population are feeling it. So, I can imagine once we hit some threshold on that point, you hit like a 20, 30% threshold, one in every 4 or 3 people start feeling the effect, or they can feel something, it's like they're around some sort of emission, even next to your own wires in your walls. But like if you feel some sort of problem and you're making that awareness link, then you can have some choices to not have to live in that. You can get away from it and find other mitigation strategies to see if it makes a difference or not. And some people, it's their main thing, and I get called out for that reason. For other people, it's a component of EMF. It's another issue. So stray voltage, let me just talk about this for a moment, but stray voltage is like there's more protons in the space, so there's more voltage happening in an area, or stray current coming into an area. And because of this, there could be pockets even around your home where there's just higher stray voltage in an area.
What produces stray voltage?
this is usually produced, it can be produced in multiple ways. Usually it's bad wiring.
Mm-hmm.
Like you might have a neutral that is not properly hooked through the junction boxes. You might have something ungrounded or partially grounded.
Mm-hmm.
There could be other problems where just the electron flow of the ground is just not taking out the electrons back away out of the space.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you would plug in, typically anything two-pronged that you have plugged in to a closed circuit, which means a closed circuit is, it's an active
Mm-hmm.
electronic circuit off your circuit breaker. If you plug something two-pronged into it, you won't have that third prong, which is your ground,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll have more stray voltage coming out into your space around what you have plugged into it.
Mm-hmm.
This includes when the device is off and not actually on, even though it's plugged into your closed circuit. So a perfect example would be like a lamp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's say you have an old Tiffany lamp that's two-pronged.
Mm-hmm.
You plug it in to your closed loop circuit,
Mm-hmm.
and you can measure the stray voltage just before you plug it in and after you plug it in.
Mm-hmm.
And you might find there's, let's say, an excess of a couple extra volts in your space.
Mm-hmm.
There might even be more,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what's going on that breaker and what's going on with that lamp and all these other factors.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go in and I'll measure the stray voltage, and I often find that a lot of people will, they might be sensitive to EMF, but they might be living in a really high voltage, extra excess voltage area. And if you think about just pH levels, like the more protons you have in a solution, the more acidified you're making that space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you're
And
sleeping.
then disease thrives in acidic environments.
Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're just in a space that has just more excess voltage around you, you would expect things to become more acidified in all of your systems.
Mm-hmm.
From your organ levels, your blood pH, everything like this. So your body's looking for electrons.
Mm-hmm.
As to why, like grounding, like when you go out into nature and you do earthing or grounding,
Mm-hmm.
that's helping to maintain this homeostasis between your proton-electron level.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you drink water, in part, is to get extra electrons from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, all of these things matter, and they matter over the long term. So, like, this is a big component of EMF. Part of the EMF situation that I find is that you can have more stray voltage. It's invisible to the eye, but like it could be there. Like there's been actually some severe accidents that have happened out in waterways where they'll have like one of the like the gas pumps like out on the docks,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids will like jump into the water, and then suddenly they're like they don't have the muscle coordination. They feel like they can't move as well. Well, that gas pump is hooked up to something electric, and it might be creating stray voltage out on the docks into the water. When you get into the water, your muscle systems might not be working as well, and then there could be some drowning potential. And so there's been like people even recently in the last few years who have made devices and made systems to prevent stray voltage around swimming pools, around docks, around these areas, because they know it can be a problem, to warn people that there could be excess stray voltage in the area.
So talk to me about what we hold in our hands all the time.
You like this thing?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So-
and I'm going to check on this to make sure it's still recording. Perfect. Yeah, because back to the circadian rhythm and artificial light and EMF, I want people to really understand the importance of what you do.
Okay. So I've just created this company like in the last 2 years, but I've really been playing around with EMF meters and stuff for 10 years.
Yes.
And have really, helped. It's been more like kind of like a feeling that when we're around in society, I like everybody to have all information, all knowledge at their fingertips to say, okay, what's really happening to me in my environments? And EMF is just one of these things. Because it's invisible, people just, if it's like monkey don't see, monkey don't do,
Yeah.
versus monkey see, monkey do. We just forget that there could be other things going on affecting our biology, affecting us, or even affecting our our machines, even our
Yeah.
AI, all the stuff that we're using, even with our technologies.
Yes.
And I think that there's, I really feel like we could set up a world that's quite different.
Mm-hmm.
A world that, yeah, we could set up a world that's quite different, a world that can minimize these artificial frequencies to our environments, and just like thinking about our food supply. I mean, when we go and choose to eat a better meal, a better organic meal, a meal that's less artificial, why aren't we thinking about light in the same way? Because we can. Like, and we're digesting this. We're digesting food. We're digesting light. So why not include the entire gambit of everything to see what influence this might have on our health, and we can then individually make that judgment call.
Well, I think this is a good segue to how you started with this, because you first started as was it a biologist or a scientist?
Biologist.
Biologist with who? With what education system?
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in biology from Oregon State, and then after Oregon State, I went down to Stanford University and worked as a staff laboratory, like researcher, assistant, did a lot of things in laboratories for which was called the Bio 44 X and Y parts of we would train up like the pre-meds in their laboratories. I also, during summers, I worked at the Environmental Health and Safety department on campus, and then I would go into different laboratories and catalog, you know, like MSDSs and all the properties and components on them, and I tell other researchers around campus that their lab was good and they didn't have any chemical problems or issues. Other cases they had other safety violations, and let them know like this needs to be cleaned up in the next few weeks. And then go back and log these into the databases at the time. This is in the early 90s. So by the mid 90s, I'm also like, I've been into gaming a lot. And between all the database stuff I did on campus and all the gaming stuff I had done just freelancing, I ended up working for a video game company. And then I found through the first few years of working in video games, I wasn't feeling as well. I was gaining more weight, I was feeling more lethargic. There were just all these health issues started coming on compared to just a few years previously. And then by 1998, some bigger problems started happening. I started getting these spots in my eyes, and the spots would last for hours and days, and I couldn't see through them, and eventually they might clear out, and then some spots happen that last some months, and I'm like, okay, I've got to see an ophthalmologist to figure out what's going on. The ophthalmologist diagnosed and said that, well, you have some capillary bleeding back in your retinal tissues, and this is happening, and there's some stressor. He's like, you don't happen to like stay up late playing video games, do you? I'm like, well, that's my job.
Yeah.
So I had to like figure out, well, what do I do here? This is my career. How do I minimize this? And the ophthalmologist told me at the time, he's like, well, a lot of these CRTs, these cathode ray tubes that you're using, this is still back in the 90s. He's like, you might want to like keep them away or put some screens over your screens, because I'm worried about like gamma ray and X-ray emissions from your screens. And I'm like, oh, what's going on here? So then I started getting into like looking up, okay, here's a form of light. You know, most people know going through an X-ray, okay, let's not do this for very long. You know, you wear lead shields when you go to the dentist and all this stuff. But then we weren't really thinking about, up until like the late 80s and early 90s, that we should be doing something about the screens and the emissions coming out of our screens. But little did the ophthalmologist know that screens also and often produce a lot of electric and magnetic fields coming off of them as well, which can also promote oxidative stress in different tissues. And I happened to be working in front of 3 monitors in 1998 that were within a foot of my eyes.
Right there.
Right there.
Whoa.
And so immediately after knowing, okay, there's a chance I could be going blind here if I keep damaging these tissues, or is this something genetic that I'm just going to have? I don't know. I'm going to do everything in my power to like figure this out. I was looking even in stuff into my diet at the time to go like, okay, what's happening with different things that could cause stress from my diet into my vision or into my system. So I was looking into like MSG, glutamate, like these kind of things where you get too much of it, too much sugar, right? And I cleaned up my diet. I ended up running a marathon. I did all this stuff back then.
Wow.
And it pretty much helped and went away. And I figured out that when I go out to the Rose Bowl in Pasadena and get out there like at 6 a.m. and run with the morning light, and I found out over doing this over a couple of weeks, everything improved. My eye spots went away. You know, it was all going great. And then after the marathon, everything was going good. And then I decided to join a gym and then start working out at night under artificial light and realizing, wait, it's all coming back again.
Yeah.
I need to get out into the morning sun again.
Yeah.
This is huge. There's something about this. And I didn't really put it together really what it was. But then, with the screens, going back to the screens, the first thing I did was I put the screens about 3 feet away from my eyes. And I did notice some improvements, but not all the improvements. And I did realize there is something about the screens, what's happening here. So, fast forward another 10 years, then I had already learned a lot more about EMFs and emissions and started measuring the screens and realizing, okay, a lot of screens have a lot of electric and magnetic fields coming off of them, depending on how each monitor is different.
Yeah.
Like one monitor might be actually within a half foot, the fields fall off. Another monitor might be 2 or 3 feet away, the fields fall off. So each environment is quite different in how you measure it, and that's what my business does. I would go in and look at things, and I'm actually surprised usually every time I go into a client's house, because I initially come in with certain expectations based on what the client's saying, and 9 times out of 10 I'll go in and find something just really off the wall, different and interesting with what's happening. A recent client I had 3 weeks ago up in Washington State, I went in to measure a home that a new couple were buying a new home, and they wanted, before they would close on escrow.
That's when we called.
That's
when we talked.
That's
We were
right.
Like, I'm heading over there because she won't close until she figures out what the EMF levels are like.
Yeah. So I found, like, they were actually savvy. They knew about EMF, and they found, like, a friend contacted me. They knew I was up there in Oregon. I could probably make a 2-hour drive up there and see them.
Yeah.
And I got there to measure this more of like a transformer box outside of their home to see what was happening out there. And sure enough, there's like 5 milligauss in their front yard and like along their driveway and all this. And then I'm like, well, let me just verify, let me do a quick sweep around the home for other magnetic, electric, and RF. And I went up to the bedroom. In the wall of the bedroom, I see 80 milligauss. This is like unbelievable amount of magnetic field coming off this one wall. And it had such a strong field, it was like a 6-foot field coming off of the wall, penetrating all into the bed space where they would be sleeping.
6 feet or
6
6 feet?
6 feet radius from this wall, like the wiring in this one wall.
So like this.
So like a 12-foot diameter in all directions away from this one point in the wall. And on one side of the bed, like where the wife was going to sleep probably, she would be getting like 10 milligauss sleeping in that every night.
So what would that do to her essentially?
Well, it's kind of like we still don't know exactly, and it's going to be individual to each person. Like, it might not do anything to her. It might actually affect her tremendously. Like, we don't know her own specific health status, where she's at. Like, there's so many factors that play into this, like how well hydrated you are, your own genetics, your epigenetics, how you're responding to things in your environment, her diet, her everything. It's all the lifestyle stuff. That's why I named my company that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say, like there are certain people I think that can just handle the EMF better. And it might be just like this overall, like this threshold load that they're at this at a current moment. We're all at a different threshold of where we're at with our health, and it changes. It varies at different stages of our life. As we know, as we get older, we have probably that threshold gets a little lower,
Yeah.
right? So who knows if it's going to affect her, but it's not, I don't think it's going to help.
Yeah.
It's like, you know,
Well, but she also has that intuition of check my bedroom because I think I'm sensitive to EMF.
yes.
And so it's that personal compass of what you feel like you are affected by.
It's true, and it's this is also an issue that is, and I've learned over the years because I've been sensitive to it, that we can't let the negativity of it run away with us either. It's like anything. It's like any stressor we get into our lives. Like if we start having this negative overall disposition toward anything that could harm us, then what is that like? Is that a good frequency ourselves to be on?
Yeah.
Just from our own psychology.
Yeah.
So I try to like, you know, just paint that reality out, and there are people that will get into a state of like, you know, like really like this is the worst thing in the world on the planet attitude, just like, you know, a person would be like, well, I don't want to like be near a cliff, and again you get into sympathetic activation, and really what's going back to circadian rhythm, this is why it's really important to, you know, find that flow of the day so you can work your way through and deal with these stresses, not let these other stresses like consume a person, because it's the way we live, it's our modern way of life. And you know, it's funny, like a lot of electricians, right? Like in this issue of EMF, there's this whole concept of the tinfoil hat person.
Yeah.
So a lot of electricians, like they deal with energy, they deal with wires, they have this like, I'd say a lot of them have this like strong will, like, I'm an electrician, I'm going to go out there and, you know, put in this energy stuff, and these other people that say it's a problem, I don't feel the problem. And they almost have this like placebo effect on both, like there's placebo effects all over the place, but this placebo effect of like, this isn't going to harm me, it's not a problem. And that's probably the best attitude to have.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're going in and they're dealing with this, and you know, even the guys working up on the RF towers, they're just like, you know, well, this, sure, it could harm me, but I'm not going to let it bother me.
Well, the placebo effect doesn't get as much recognition
Right.
as it should. Like, people are like, oh, that's just the placebo effect. No, that's the motherfucking placebo effect. You know? Like, that's how strong our minds are, because, you know, we have the power to catapult our body into, you know, the downward spiral or the upward spiral, you know? So, given the situation that you measured this, what would you call it, magnetic field?
This was a pretty broad magnetic field coming from a specific source in a home. Now, typically when you're in a home, there will be also a background magnetic field associated with the home and the wiring system and the grounding system. So in the US, it's typically between like, I'd say 0.5 to 1 milligauss, and I've seen it, even in my previous home, it was like 0.8 milligauss, and even at certain times of the day, that magnetic field fluctuation can go higher or lower depending on what's going on in the neighborhood, depending on how things are grounded, depending on if there's multiple grounding systems coming in. Like you might have your cable's grounding system interacting with your own home's grounding system, and that can create more widespread slight magnetic field differences where I start picking it up on the meters. But in this case, it wasn't like 0.5 milligauss, this was 80 milligauss coming off a wall.
So how do you address that?
So I in my report, I let them know if there's something faulty, some line, and I went down underneath. This was in an upstairs room. I went underneath the room to see what was happening there. I saw the heater system and the furnace system. They're both electric. So I first suspected that there's something maybe coming from one of these two, and they should call an engineer to come out and check out what's going on in the wall to see what they see. So the engineer did come out, he checked both of those, and they all checked out fine, but they found another wire from an old cable that was a live cable line from the wall going out to the street, and he could trace that all the way out to the street. And at the street, he capped it, so then once he turned off that line, then the magnetic fields would poof. And he actually asked me, because it was so far away, I said, well, you know, for giving this little what I've really given you, I charge for my time, so I got money for that, but I also let them know you could use me for a service. I could drive up just to do a 5-minute check to see if the magnetic fields go away, or you could order a basic Gauss meter online for like $30 and check it that way, and that's what he wanted to do at that point. So this engineer now was ramped up, and he understood more about EMF, which is great. So this is what I've been trying to do over the years too. I've worked with several electricians and gotten them knowledgeable. And of course, at first, they're all like tinfoil hatty. And then later when they actually see the meters and see what's going on, then they're like, okay, well, there could be more to this.
Okay, so let's take a scenario where someone is sensitive to EMF.
Yeah.
What are kind of how are they affected by it? And then what do you see once you come in and neutralize the space?
Yeah.
And I don't know if neutralize is the right term, but
either mitigate or I first come in and just take a look over the space, and then often later I might need to work with the same client again and again to get the space to a point where it's a safer, better space for them.
Okay.
Right?
So what are the differences that you have noticed in people who do benefit?
This is really interesting. I've had so many cases over the year. I could talk about this for like hours, but a few key things is to first understand is it affects the neurological system, usually in these people. It can give you headaches, but oftentimes I see a lot of people with brain fog. They will, and these are more severe cases, which is this terminology that we're using at the moment in science is called EHS, which is electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And this term is like this big long term that sounds all fancy and whatever, but really back in the day it was called microwave illness. And even before that, we suspect in the 1890s, like during Sigmund Freud's time, it was called neurasthenia. So like it's been around since the electric grids, and even before Tesla, it's been around since the telegraph.
Yeah.
And
well, what was that thing you told me? It was like the radar tower, the military could stand by it and melt a candy bar and also know that they couldn't get their wives pregnant? That's
right. So, I mean, originally they accidentally discovered being close to a microwave dish. This is, I think, in the early 1950s, maybe the Korean War or something. I don't think it was World War II. I think it was just after. They had radar dish system testing, and a lot of the guys did figure out, like, okay, you could melt things if you stood there, and they just suspected, okay, well, I'm probably going to become sterile, so yeah, I don't have to get my wives pregnant. Like, it was that.
But research on EMF has been suppressed, right?
Well, yes and no. Like if you dig into all this, you can find it. It's not like suppressed necessarily. It's just not talked about much. Also, the radar dishes at that time had a huge amount of intensity, and some of the standards for the intensity coming off of the RF towers and the radar dishes and all this have been, like, the military helped to establish these guidelines for like what we should be using so we don't see a heat effect, like this thermal effect from the microwave transmissions, which can create direct bodily harm and melt a candy bar. Use your microwave oven to cook your food. Versus at very low levels when you have this non-thermal heat effect. This is when a lot of people start to believe, well, because it doesn't cause this direct heat damage, therefore it must be safe. And jumping that conclusion is kind of a form of insanity. Just like anything, it's like saying, okay, I have this amount of poison I'm eating, and at this amount it's totally fine. Right? So, like, we have to be cautious in science, and that's why the precautionary principle exists for that reason, is to see how different people react. And to one person, the poison actually might be not a problem at all. It might actually be a benefit. It might create hormesis, a temporary beneficial effect of
chemotherapy, right?
Yeah, or to just regulate your immune system, to get your immune system cranking in the short term, and hopefully the long-term effects won't be bad.
Which, I digress, but that's what Brett Weinstein's hypothesis on the telomeres was of these rats being massively produced, like breeding at 8 months, and then having these abnormally long telomeres, that when they were being tested with the medications that they were trying to come out, it was actually like enhancing the rats because it was acting like chemotherapy,
right?
And so like, but then they introduced it to the general population and it was killing people, you know.
Right.
But anyway, I digress. So, but what I really want to know is the difference that you notice in clients once you mitigate the EMFs.
So, I would say the biggest things I see is in children.
Okay.
And my car mechanic that I have, he had me come over for an assessment. And I first started sweeping his house, and actually his house looked quite good. He did have a bit of like microwave background from a tower that was like maybe about a mile away, but it wasn't really coming into the house much. It was like kind of the backside of his property, and then once you're inside the house, I wasn't really picking up much. So I was like, okay, not much microwave. He didn't really, he had the router at the whole different side of his house, and like I wasn't detecting much back in the bedroom spaces. Then I started looking at the electric and magnetic fields and the stray voltage and dirty electricity. The dirty electricity was not too bad. I mean, dirty electricity is kind of an interesting, it's kind of like this mid-band of EMF that you look at where you're detecting like from about the kilohertz range up into the low megahertz range.
Okay.
And this area of the spectrum, I can also look to see if there's other harmonics in what are called transients coming off of like your power grid lines, things like this that might be also affecting you coming into your space. Like even on your regular wires in your house, like it could create an antenna effect. Like you can actually pick up better like FM AM radio just by tapping into the wires in your house and like listening. Like and sometimes even on my meters, on certain types of meters I can actually hear like FM radio coming across my meters because there could be an FM, output station close by that it's really like harmonizing that house with certain signals. Yeah. But for this particular client, he had 2 kids, and both kids had ADHD, and every night they had a really hard time calming their nervous system, like getting them back into the parasympathetic. And they typically play with their kids, out in the living room and in the bedroom with all their toys and things like this. And I go into the house and I start measuring the stray voltage. And in the bed spaces, I was picking up like 12 to 15 volts. Now this is pretty significant stray voltage levels. I mean, once you get up like past 20 volts, you get into a situation where people can start getting heart arrhythmias, like affecting cardiovascular function in a lot of what I've read over the years. So when I saw this, I'm like, oh man, this is an issue. And then I looked at the magnetic and electric fields, and they were pretty significant. And in their sleeping spaces, it was like in their head to chest area, I was still like up toward 3 to 4 milligauss of electric and magnetic field. So I'm like, okay, let's try this. Do you know where your circuit breaker panel is? And he's like, yeah. And I went over to it, and I found out where I could shut off the power to their kid's bedroom at night. And he's like, okay, I'll give this a try. I'll talk to my wife about it. She's really open to like trying this out. And they had like little LED battery powered lights as well, so they didn't have any problem with issues of the night. So the very next morning, I get a phone call from him.
The next
morning after shutting the power down. And he's like, you changed my kids. It's like they're different. They're like not bouncing off the walls. They're not all crazy anymore.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, well, let's monitor this. It might not be that. It could be something else. Because I'm still skeptical, even because certain people might even attribute, oh, it's got to be the EMF. But I'm not that way. I'm like, it could be the EMF. It could be something totally different. So then the next few mornings, the next week later, he's like, yeah, they're fixed.
So what does he do? Just turn the power off in their room?
Each night he goes to the circuit breaker panel, and actually this circuit breaker panel in his house, it powered like a side room, their kid's room, and like part of the hallway, and the amperage that was set for that house was a bit of an older house. So he figured out how to shut down just that kid's room, and then he starts shutting out his own room too, right?
Wow.
So he also goes through this ritual every night now of shutting off about like 3 or 4 breakers.
Wow.
And then and like once he did it the first night, and then his wife saw the difference. They're like, we can't go back now. Like this is helping them. So for it's kind of each his own. Like to the next ADHD kid, it might not be that.
Yeah.
But it's a possibility. So I help with people checking that out. I had another client with Lyme's disease, and she could actually sense the stray voltage patches in and around the house before I even brought my meters to it.
Wow.
She's like, every time I stand by the door, I feel really bad, and I can't stand there for more than a minute.
Yeah.
And she's like, when I go into the kitchen at this spot, I feel really bad. So she even with the stray voltage on that side of it, she could feel the differences there. But then she also had a smart meter issue that I found in her room. And it was kind of like on the back side of her wall. And it looked like it was shielded. Like when you go to the outside of the house, certain smart meters, the panels can help to mitigate the RF that comes into the home. In this case, it looked like it was happening and mitigated well, but it wasn't. There was a lot of RF coming into the bedroom space right on the backside of her wall on top of it.
So what do you do in that instance?
Well,
do you do something, or do you call somebody in?
In this instance, I first, I suggested that she moved her bed to a different part, and because she had Lyme's, I even suggested you probably want to sleep in a different room. And she started doing that. She actually moved, instead of using the master bedroom, she turned it into something else, I think, and then started going into a different room. But she was also looking at even different homes at that point. She was to the point of just feeling so horrible every day that she's thinking the environment wasn't well. And the stray voltage is also a problem unless you get an electrician out and really look at each breaker to really figure out how to get rid of this excess voltage, and also use products that don't have a lot of two-pronged stuff. In her case, she had one of these air unit conditioners on that was about 3 feet away from her bed. So she had magnetic fields from that unit. She had stray voltage because it was plugged in that unit. Then she had her smart meter also hitting her. So as you can see, and then she had a magnetic field background in the house that was not too bad. I think it was about 0.5 to 0.8 milligauss. But if somebody's already sensitive, already having an issue, even having a higher magnetic field background can be a problem to some people.
Even all of our phone chargers are two-pronged, all of our a lot of our appliances, handheld appliances that we use in the kitchen. So what was the outcome in her case?
It's still TBD. She found places that are better for her Lyme where she can be at.
And does she notice a difference?
She does.
Yeah.
And now she knows because I went in with my equipment, I could say, this area over here of the house, you don't want to spend much time in. She already knew some of the areas, and the other areas she couldn't feel. She could feel the stray voltage. She couldn't feel the other RF, from the smart meter. She couldn't really feel the magnetic fields. But all of this could be contributing to her. So she felt at least much better after the fact, knowing that she had a confirmation with her husband. She had a confirmation my husband has been telling me I'm not feeling these things at these points, and he thinks I'm a little crazy, that he thinks I'm standing here at this point of the house and it's somehow magically doing something to me. I come in with my meters and I show the husband, look at the excess voltage in the space. And then look at the excess voltage 2 feet away. It drops off. And he's like, okay, maybe there is something to what she's saying. So it helps people not feel as crazy as well.
Yes. Well, it's funny. I have a really good friend, and she is from Pennsylvania. She lived in this area for quite a few years. I think it was, I want to say 15 years, and she just moved back. And I always made fun of her when I first met her because she didn't have a cell phone.
Right.
And I was like, why don't you have a cell phone? She's like, well, because it hurts my head. She's like, anytime I go up to, it hurts. I was like, you're so crazy, And then she got a cell phone, but then she didn't use it very often. She's like, it hurts my head. It's weird. And it makes sense. my husband just got the AirPods.
Yeah.
And I use them sometimes, and I only put one in so I can hear the kids and everything. And after about like an hour, that entire side of my head radiates.
Yep.
Like I don't like it. And I called my friend and I was like, hey, there might be something to your not liking cell phones thing, you know?
Oftentimes what I'll say is that if you want to put the same frequency as a microwave oven up to your head, go ahead and connect to Bluetooth because it's 2.45 gigahertz. But a microwave oven, it functions much differently. It has a higher intensity and it's more like a sine wave versus something like, data transmission across an AirPod that is a lot less intense, but is more different in the way the frequency looks. And it might be more biologically active, especially if you're listening through an AirPod, I don't know, for how many ever hours listening to music, versus being in front of a microwave for 10 minutes. It's kind of like it's this toss-up of, I don't know, it's like, to one person, that AirPod's never going to be a problem. To the next person, who knows? Like, there's so many variables there. Even like the skull thickness plays a role into mitigation. Thinking of like new babies born in the hospital, many people don't think about the cranial cap isn't like sealed for the first like 3 to 6 months or whatever it is. And what happens if you put something like an EMF up near the skull of a baby who already has a thin skull but doesn't even have part of the skull exposing the brain to it? Right? Like, these are unanswered questions that we can make some ideas. Like, it's probably not a good idea to put this stuff up there. It's probably not just like we want to protect the baby so the baby doesn't fall and hurt just into direct injury, but we have to think about other potential injuries in our modern society with all this new stuff.
Now, what about artificial light? How does that affect our circadian rhythm?
It's probably the most major player. The EMF frequencies, like we've been talking about, there is some literature there in the science that shows that there could be some melatonin suppression with it, but it's like kind of more scattered and not as like looked at. And in some cases it's like, well, there is no melatonin suppression, right? But in other cases it's like, well, there could be. So again, it's like all these factors play into which each study does. With artificial light, this like, it appears that, again, like this awakening light, this blue light, the indigo light, the daily light it wants to suppress our melatonin and our production of it, not just in the pineal gland, but in other places of the body. Like, for instance, like in Parkinson's disease, right? We know that the gut biome and the bacteria that's being produced there, they create, other levels of dopamine. They create melatonin. Your liver can produce these things. Your pineal gland is super, super important for the regulation and production for the circadian rhythm. So when we have to think about how the body is making the melatonin and the signals for making the melatonin, where it's being made, and how it's getting into all the tissues in our body and helping clean it out, you have to start thinking about all the systems, all the organ systems and the cardiovascular system, and just how it's getting transported and used on a daily basis. So I guess with the artificial light side of it, it's kind of like, to me, the way I think about it is that when you're getting all these artificial frequencies at the wrong time of day, we have to think about, okay, how is our body going to respond to this, and how does it react to this input from the artificial light? And you can look at the properties of light itself, the lumens, the amount of lumens coming off, or even the light particle itself. How much light does it take for our skin and for our eyes to register that there's light happening? Because the body want to say, I want to start waking up now. I want to get more sympathetic. I don't want to, all these different processes I want to change because the light is not there or is there. If we think about moonlight, like during certain times, when it's a full moon, we have this term called the lunatics come out because we're messing with circadian rhythm. It's like it's like a natural way of thinking about what other ways can we mess with our circadian rhythm. But if you look at something like firelight or candlelight, you do it at night, it doesn't really seem to mess with our circadian rhythm. And if you look at how the spectrum is, if you look at the intensity, the output, like through a spectroscope, you just, it's a really cheap $12 thing. You can like look at the wavelength breakdown, like through a prism, to just see how much light intensity is coming off of firelight. You see it's mainly like orange, yellow, red, infrared. Of course, you feel this heat. And that doesn't really mess with our circadian rhythm. To an extent, it may, especially if you, let's say, alter red light. You don't make firelight anymore. Let's say you pulse red light, because you have it plugged into the power grid that creates a pulsed effect. Or you add, maybe you don't have as many frequencies with the light, or maybe there's a certain frequency you're hitting that does have some influence on our systems in some way that shouldn't really be there at a certain time of day. So these are like huge questions to answer into the future. To say like what frequencies, like what note are you playing, and what note is good for what time of day.
And were you saying that artificial light can obstruct our body's ability to produce melatonin?
It's like when you are exposed to this and your body and your eyes get the signal that there is more like you're in daytime because it's sensing the blue light, the green light, the indigo light, your body will suppress the production of melatonin. And that suppression,
because it's not time yet.
It's not time, and like it can. We don't know how much in each individual it's going to suppress it. There's certain magic people out there that seem to be like they can be in artificial light better than the next person. Again, this might have to do with whatever they're doing, but maybe long term, like if you think in the short term, you look at just one case, it looks like they're not being affected by it. But if you start looking at long-term studies, long-term things, this is why it's become such a problem. Because like, for instance, there was like this giant study of nurses in Sweden back in like 2012 that showed that, there's higher breast cancer rates, in certain forms of the population that have graveyard shift. So we might need to start thinking about the entire society and how we're using light, because like we do need certain people to probably be working key like vital jobs for society late at night, like police officers. But do we want our police officers or nurses or doctors to be subjected to all this artificial lighting that could actually be mitigated pretty well if we use different lighting, or do we don't pulse the lighting, or like we come back to more of a less stressed form of lighting where we're not having to like deal with all this. And that's just like a kind of a fundamental reboot of how we think about electricity and light and how we're using it all the time. And
bringing awareness to it.
Yeah, and because a lot of these things aren't often connected, like we often think of health in terms of food and exercise, and we're not thinking in terms of just the entire cascade of everything, and especially light, which is just there. It's so fundamental, but it's right there in front of us that we often just don't think about. This could be having actually one of the larger effects on me.
Yeah, especially with our screens, our laptops, working so much remotely now with everything that's going on.
Well, even stimulation, like what I like to talk with my clients about is just say, let's try to do our work at a time of the day where it's not going to interfere with our parasympathetic, to get us so we can chill out and have that downtime. We need the downtime. And modern life has like told us, oh no, you can have uptime even at 2 o'clock in the morning when you play a video game. Like,
well, for me as a mom, it's like, yes, everybody's in bed. Like, I get to do my thing now, and then I go to bed late and then wake up just drained,
Yeah.
So it would make sense to get work done earlier in the day when your body is supposed to be working at that pace.
Right, I mean, hence why there's coffee.
Yeah.
Because I think there's probably a direct correlation between light exposure and coffee intake.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So break down kind of your basic, hey Scott, come over, I need your services. And then how does that transcribe into checking out my home and seeing what needs to be addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question because it is totally a gamble to do this work and just guess like what could be happening in your home. You can't guess if like a circuit is bad in your house. You can't, like, even if there's a phone tower outside, you might actually be pretty well mitigated if you're sleeping and living in the house, depending on where your room is in the house, what's going on, how much intensity is coming in. But like, so I often tell my clients straight out, like they'll have certain assumptions straight about. They'll be like, well, I can see a phone tower that's like a half a mile away, and like I don't feel well when I sleep at night, or like in the days I'm having these issues happening, I'm getting migraines, or I'm getting headaches, or I feel tingles all the time. Like there's different symptoms that are pretty common with some of my clients. And a lot of times, like I said, I'm surprised. I'll come into homes and I have to tell my client first, I say, well, like that could be a problem. Like the phone tower could be a problem, your router could be a problem, your smart meter could be a problem. Like all these things could play into each individual like microspace in the home. But really, I have to come out and see what's going on so I can really make an assessment. And, you know, sometimes they are completely correct and they've nailed it. And my services just help verify what they know. And then I can help with them, like, to create new places or different, like, styles, like, almost like, you know,
like an energetic feng
like
shui.
like a feng shui a little bit, which is funny. But yeah, like going into the home to like create a space, or even like suggest like, okay, it looks like your building material is mitigating what's coming in from the outside, and a lot of homes are that way, especially if it's like built from brick or concrete, or have metal outsidings, and you know you can create more of like a Faraday cage situation to like have a safer space inside. Well, not necessarily safer, but just a lower EMF space that's inside. And then I could, in some cases, they might have a smart meter that's not too much of a problem, and I could get some like metal backed thing on a wall, let's say behind a bookcase. So like it might be like the RF might be flying through the bookcase, but we could put something between the bookcase and the wall that can help what's called attenuation. We can help like back reflect the light so it goes back out of the house and it actually doesn't come into it.
What kind of material do you use for that kind of stuff?
It varies, and it oftentimes has to do with the frequency. So because there's a measurement of the wavelength of the frequency,
which you're able to detect with your gadgets.
Yeah, the wavelength will determine what kind of material, what kind of mesh, usually it's like a metal mesh, we can use to back block the frequency back out again. And so like in some cases you can go down to Home Depot and get some chicken wire that's like the hexagonal chicken wire, and it's good and get certain frequencies. In other cases you might have to get like more of a gridded metal mesh, aluminum. You can do that, but again it's like I don't use these in the home. I try not to use any metal in the home. Or if it's in the home, it needs to be far away from people, because bringing in these metals, like they could be, they could have different things. They could be sprayed down with different things. Like they could be off-gassing VOCs. They could be, people could just be more reactive to living and sleeping near metal. And I don't like that either. So each case is cautious, and I let the client know, like let's look for a solution that is going to lower your EMF. We might not be able to get down to 0, but it will be, let's say, down 80 or 90% of what it used to be, and see how you do. And then work with them again if they have, other issues coming up. In certain cases, though, certain clients, it is off the charts. Like even if you mitigate things down 95% they still feel it. It's still part of it. It's still a trauma to them. And it's hard to get them out of space. I worked with a woman a couple of years ago, and it was horrible, her case, but it was also reaffirming in her case and good. She had cancer twice, and she was now coming down with cancer a third time. She was in her early 70s, and the only way she could feel good was by using a kind of like a clothing product to like mitigate all frequencies coming into her space. And she was like almost like a blanket. She was like using it and sleeping around it. But she was putting this silver mesh thread on her body as well. And you know, this potentially has you could bring in other EMF with that if you have it that close to your body, especially when it's ungrounded like that. So in her case, she was living in a home that was 100 yards away from 2 cell phone towers.
Wow.
Her house, though, funny enough, was made of a material that was mitigating maybe 90% of all of that RF inside of the home.
Okay.
So even though it looked like she was having a problem from the cell phone towers, it turned out not to be the case. She didn't have much stray voltage in the house either. She had these lighting systems in her house that was horribly wired, where even with the lights off, she was in 70 milligauss, 30 to 70 milligauss, from her bedroom all the way down through her hallways into the kitchen spaces and partially into the living rooms.
Oh, wow.
And there was this backside of her living room that she would usually hang out in because she would say, I feel the best in this space. And she just kind of figured out over time that when she was over there, it was the lowest space that had these lower magnetic fields. So even though she called me up for the cell phone towers, it really was, it was just a different part of the EMF spectrum.
Yeah.
So and it may have been the cell phone towers in part because of the wiring bringing in some of those frequencies in on the wiring, her being, it's like, it's a very complex issue. So I can, as I go into spaces, I'll like let people know the highs and the lows of the intensity, but also like ways that what can we do to try to reduce this out? You know, a lot of little tips and tricks going into places, but each place can be very different too.
So given that there is still a lot of unknown about EMFs, is there anyone in particular that, like, how can you motivate people to look into this more? Like, are there things in themselves that they can pinpoint and be like, you need to check out the EMF in your house? Is EMF something that everyone should be checking out in their house? Like,
I think as we move into a society, like EMF has been like this artificial EMF has been growing through society exponentially. Like people now like want to have their smart devices. They want to have they can touch a button and move their curtains, and their window curtains, and they might not realize that little emitter up there is constantly 24/7 giving off radiation, looking for the input from my controller. And the more we advance our places and the more we're just exposed to this, now I think we've hit a cusp where it is becoming more important, unless you have like more of a natural lifestyle where you like to go out camping a lot and you're just out in nature more. And how are we balancing that in our lives? Are we putting ourselves in these artificial boxes every day, or are we getting outside every day? And can we find a balance between both of these things? I think it's important that at least during the sleep cycles, we try to minimize this because it is like light energy that's hitting us. And when we're sleeping, we expect not light energy, we expect to sleep in darkness.
yeah.
So let's try to get that right. And then in the day, if we have to be exposed to it, let's try to weave more nature into our lives so we can get away from it. if we feel like, especially, this is my job, I have to do this to make ends meet, and or like I'm an electrician, I have to go out every day, and by the time you're 50 or 60 as an electrician, now what's my health like compared to 30? If I have this really strong, awesome 30-year-old that can withstand anything from the EMFs, now when I'm 50 or 60, now, okay, maybe I might need a little support here to minimize some EMFs around me.
Yeah, totally.
But luckily, most electricians hopefully are going to be being trained. That's actually one of my wishes is imagine like all the electrician unions and organizations out there suddenly would also have EMF meters on them as they went into places. Or it would be amazing. So kind of like I've suggested this in the past, like we have fire departments because occasionally a fire breaks out. But we also, what if in the future we had EMF departments where we could call the city and say, I'd like somebody to come out and just check out my wiring in my space to see if I have excess fields. Maybe there's a transformer that's like not working right and it's creating more magnetic fields. Maybe the wires aren't shielded correctly. Like all these things we know that we could minimize. We could totally fix and minimize all this. It's just now we have to cross this new threshold, this barrier between having society understand there could be a health implication with these things versus not. Because with a fire, when a real fire breaks out, there's a health implication. But when there's EMF around, we were like, well, it's invisible, it must not be happening. There's not a problem in my health, it must be all imaginary. And then some people, it might not affect them, and other people it does. So that's where, the person that feels like this is all silly talk, well, to the next person, it might really be a thing.
There might be an aha moment.
And you should maybe spend a week or two directly with that person to see what they experience, and it actually might be life-changing for that person to see their experiences.
What is and I know it's probably relative with every case, but is there a general amount of time that you spend with each case?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what I do first is I have what's called my basic, standard EMF assessment, and I'll come out and I'll check all the EMFs I've talked about with you, and I'll hit all the important rooms first in the home, and typically a home that's about 2,000 square feet, I can do the whole house in 2 hours and give a nice report as to what I found. And I'll focus on the areas where I know it's the high traffic areas where they're going to spend more time. And then I'll look at also like the bigger items that everybody's concerned about, like what's coming in from the outside that could be around. I'll look to see like what's nearby their home for like other antenna that could be out there, and also the different frequencies that could be out there. There's in some cases it can be very complicated, but in some cases there could be certain frequencies that a lot of standard meters, EMF meters, won't pick up, and a client of mine might be into EMFs and they'll be like, well, I want to just get another more expert in here to see like what's going on, and I might find in a different band with other EMFs that could be there that they just thought were not there because they're invisible and their meters aren't picking them up, and they don't go low enough or high enough in the different part of the EMF, the EM spectrum. And then I'll let them know, okay, well, now we have this problem. In some cases, I even have to go on like different websites and research what's going on around their home.
Interesting.
To figure out, okay, what kind of convergence could be happening, especially with geography and line of sight, and what could be affected there, just to get more verification. Because of how we've distributed and divided out the EM spectrum to different companies and different facilities in different parts of our society. Like you can imagine like police and emergency workers use certain bands. The AM/FM radios use certain bands. Telecoms use certain bands. So like there's sometimes like this crossover where like, especially down towards the FM radio band, kind of up into the television band, some of these bands are being repurposed right now for like 5G and stuff. So you might have like a 600 megahertz frequency that used to be a TV frequency that didn't have as much power output. Now it has way more power output because the telecom has like repurposed it. You might have like again down like other kind of service facilities from your city
Yeah.
using like 155 megahertz,
Yeah.
even though that's very close or even in the range of FM radio.
Yeah.
So instead of like, if you know how like the frequency modulation works, that's what it's called, FM radio is
Okay.
frequency modulation.
Mhm.
It's like this, more of this like better sine wave.
Mm.
It's not really a sine wave,
Yeah.
but it's like smoother.
Mm-hmm.
That might be happening, and you think on your meter you're picking up FM radio, and it's maybe not as much of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at like this other thing that's using 185 megahertz that you're
Mhm.
still picking up, and it actually is a more choppy, jagged frequency. So then you're kind of left with like okay, well, knowing it's more choppy, more jagged, and not as smooth, it probably could be more biologically active.
Mm.
And this is where like it just gets very, like we still don't know the answers, and to each person and each frequency could make a difference. So
But you are seeing differences in the quality of life of your clients
I am.
after addressing EMF levels in their homes.
Yes,
and
I would
those
say
reasons.
maybe about 60% of my clients, and the other 40% don't feel an effect, and I like to know both.
Okay.
Like I had a client in Bend,
Mm-hmm.
this was about 2 months ago, I came out for her, and she had really bad sleep, and she was trying to figure out if the sleep was a problem, and I went in her house, and her Wi-Fi router was down in her office,
Uh-huh.
and the Wi-Fi router, it pulsed so big of a radius. It was like a 30-foot radius that I was still picking it up outside of her home.
Whoa.
It was actually interfering with my measurements when I was measuring her smart meter.
Huh.
And the smart meter, the intensity coming off her router was like 10 times as much as her smart meter.
Yeah.
And then up in her bedroom, I was picking up her Wi-Fi router. And I did find some stray voltage and some other stuff, and we got her bed into a better position, but for about a week later, she checked up with me, and she's like, I really don't feel my sleep's any better. And I said,
Uh-huh.
well, what about that Wi-Fi router? And she's like, I couldn't get my husband to move it. He needs it there in the office. And I'm like, well, is it possible you put on a Christmas tree timer or something to
Yeah.
then shut it down at night when you sleep? And she's like, well, okay, I'll talk to him now. And I haven't heard back from her,
Mhm.
but like, you kind of have to like go at a little trial and error with this.
Yeah.
Even on the circuits, when I go in looking for stray voltage
Uh-huh.
and looking for other things, I have to kind of do a trial and error thing through the home to look at like when certain breakers are off, to see what the stray voltage is across the home. When certain breakers are on, look at what's across the home, because in certain cases, you can actually turn off one breaker that can be helping the flow of electrons out of the house, and when you turn it off,
It's more jagged.
you actually can increase the stray voltage in other places. So it's like this really long term, and this is like a deeper mitigation I do.
Mhm.
I can go in after I've done an initial assessment with my clients, I'll go in and do a deeper assessment, looking at the breakers and getting into really a lot of detail
Mhm.
to see if they really can find other ways to mitigate for themselves.
Wow. And given the story of your mechanic and his kids and ADHD, schools would really benefit from EMF.
Funny you say that.
Uh,
So I've been.
and let me check this to make sure, and then we might have to. Oh, we're good. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so funny you say that.
Okay.
I've been into multiple elementary schools over the last 5 years,
Uh-huh.
including my own son's
Uh-huh.
schools
Yeah.
actually. And usually they're receptive to bringing in a person like me to talk with them,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes to measure.
Uh-huh.
So I have measured in 2 different schools,
Uh-huh.
and recently last year I measured in Elk Meadow Elementary School in Bend,
Okay.
because there was a telecom that put up a phone tower nearby,
Mhm.
and it was really good news for that school for them. Even though the cell phone tower was kind of adjacent to the property of the school,
Mhm.
it was up high enough that most of the radiation was cast over the top.
Mhm.
However, in the playgrounds when the children are outside, it's a big problem.
Mhm.
Inside the school though, the school was made with a metal roof
Okay.
and bricks.
Okay.
And when I'm in the school, that phone tower really isn't coming, the frequencies are not coming into that school.
Mhm.
The bigger problem I found in the school, as you can imagine, is the Wi-Fi and all the Wi-Fi repeaters
Yep.
put up in the rooms,
Uh-huh.
which was giving off, about the average amount of radiation you'd expect from them. But then you have to like, I worked with the principal there to like suggest to her, see where this emitter's placed in the room. Can we place this at a place that's not right above the head of a student? Can we put it in a different place of the room? And she was very open to that. So she has, I don't know the result of what's going on, but that entire community there is completely aware of the EMF issue now. And there's things you can do just to minimize this radiation impact, at least the intensity of it. And the intensity, you know, is an aggregate for like, well, how much am I digesting each day from it? And get this at least further, if they still feel like they have to use these systems, they don't go hardwired, then at least they can try to get it further away. There's all kinds of movements around this country right now, and have been for the last 4 or 5 years, to make schools go back to hardwired plugins again. And it's been happening, and it's been in certain cities and communities, it's going on and it's happening, but it's just not a widespread thing anymore because, you know, people are like, well, I gotta have my tablets for my kids to do all this tech on school, and it's like, what are they doing here? Like, and if they're on them for hours a day, not only getting the EMF radiation, but looking at artificial screens. Like, we have to start really seriously thinking about what we're doing, how we're teaching our kids. In this world now, post-COVID, where tons of people are on Zoom now.
And also trying to incorporate ways of having a circadian rhythm in this world of high tech and screens and all kinds of technology that's coming out. So the importance of, you know, integrating both worlds so that our body can still function at its full potential.
Yeah, and another part of what I've done and what I do too in my career is I can go and like even have a Zoom meeting with a parent and help set up a hardwired connection in their own home, so they're not being radiated with their own Wi-Fi routers. There's ways internally you can turn it off and then hardwire your system, so then you can at least set up a kid's space, hopefully getting more natural lighting into the space. Hardwired, so you're not getting the EMF as much into the space, not the Wi-Fi signal around. And then at least these times they're on their technology, you know, there's less radiation happening. And again, thinking about, let's try to set up our spaces closer to nature. And I do that as a service. So, and it, you know, people can call me and we can do it online together.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing it up because we've hit 2 hours.
All right.
I know, that went by fast. So let's do all the plugs.
Sure.
So, Scott Compton.
Right.
And tell us how they can learn more about EMF, how they can contact you, how they can possibly obtain your services, and what time span you can, and what areas you serve.
Okay. So, learning about EMF, there's a lot of content you can find online, of course, like find on YouTube. I've done on what's called EMF Warriors. If you go on YouTube and just search for EMF Warriors, I've done 30-ish videos for this movement I helped start back in 2016 that is called EMF Warriors. It's a social media page on Facebook. And there's many, many, many videos I've done that gets into a lot of the details on this, and with actually like other doctors and researchers and people that really can expand on this issue with people, so you can watch those videos. There's other major agencies and people out there like the Environmental Health Trust, Physicians for Safe Technology. There's a group, well, there's many resources and many good books. One of the best books I like is by an author called Arthur Furstenberg, and he did a book called The Invisible Rainbow. It gives you kind of not only the history of EMF, he really lays it out in a really fun and interesting way. Also, yeah, I guess like overall, if you're looking to kind of learn about the issue, I would probably just start like working with people you trust on it. Like if that's me, that's great. I can I do consults, so I can talk with you about what you might be, the questions you have about it. If you didn't get a lot of it on this particular video.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I realized my error in trying to contain how EMF affects circadian rhythm, because it's not just that. It's way bigger than that. So my apologies for that, but I'm glad that we were still able to get a lot of information. So now how do they contact you?
So you can reach me at scott@lifestylehygiene.com. And my website is there for you. Of course, at lifestylehygiene.com is one word. And you can, feel free to call me. My number's on there. Set up an appointment with me. And I do, like I said, I can come out to your home. If you're, I travel a lot, so I might be down in California, I might be up in Oregon or Washington, so typically on the West Coast.
Cool.
I can come out. If you want to fly me out, I actually have that service as well, but there's a lot of travel fees involved.
Yeah, of course.
But I would do that if it was worth my time.
Cool.
As well.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it because we're in California right now, and I know you guys live in Oregon. So, but traveling a lot is good. And I was like, all right, when can you make it over here? I need to do this. And I feel slightly cross-eyed right now because I'm just so much information just came through. Yeah. Discount. A discount? You were going to offer that for anyone who watches this.
Oh, right. Yeah, so another thing I'd like to do is anybody who watches this video and has contacted you through it, and you pass it on to me, they get immediately a 20% discount on any service I offer or any consult or anything.
Thanks for the reminder. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So if you guys are interested in Scott's services and have seen this video, you guys get a 20% discount. So mention it for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I absolutely appreciate it. And it's so funny because in the metaphysical communities, everybody's like, oh, we're light beings and everything. And to some people that sounds frou-frou, but we are literally light beings.
We are.
What was that example you gave me about the two rats? What is the difference between a live rat and a dead rat? Yeah,
that was from, this is in Andrew Marino's book, one of his books. He described the situation, and it's wonderful, and it stuck with me forever. But Stenz Grigori was a researcher. He's the one who actually discovered vitamin C. He had a conversation with another person. I don't think it was directly with Andrew Marino, but he described that we are life, and we are energy beings, we're light beings. And the way he described this is if you have two identical rats, and one rat in this hand is exactly the same genetics, same material stuff. And this rat over here is living, and this rat is dead. What is the difference between the two? They both weigh the same. What is happening here? Well, this dead rat doesn't have that light energy in it anymore.
100%.
Right.
100%. Well, I love that. Let's leave it there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you both for coming. If you guys can't see Deborah over here in the corner, Deborah Gambrell. Hi. Super appreciative to you for bringing us together. So I thank you guys for being here. So thank you very much. Yes.